Our purpose at WE is to change the dismal statistics of our people, particularly Māori and Pacifica people. We do this through helping small and medium-sized businesses to thrive. Our businesses need our help. So many have felt the pressures of lockdown and are facing challenges that they've never faced before. Challenges that are impacting their livelihoods. That is why we're bringing you this series, to share stories of the people behind our businesses, their successes, their failures, their challenges, and their triumphs.
If you are already in business, we hope you will be inspired. Perhaps someone will share one piece of gold that makes a difference in your business. If you've been thinking about starting a business, we hope that you will be motivated to start your own business venture.
We hope that by sharing these stories, we can help small businesses on the road to recovery all across New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific.
So grab your cup of tea and whakarongo mai.
Kia ora te whānau, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to our cup of tea this evening. I'm really excited to bring to you today Frances Valintine. So Frances is one of the founders and directors of the Mindlab and Tech Futures Lab. So welcome, Frances. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Kia ora, Wendy. Great to be here.
All right, so the Mindlab and Tech Futures Lab, what exactly is that?
So it's an organisation that is first and foremost a graduate school. So we're in the area of technology. So we have around 1,000 students who are studying with us in areas such as technological futures or connected environments, highly technical areas around IoT or artificial intelligence. But we also have programs around developing teachers. And actually our biggest program is run from Auckland for teachers around the whole entire country. So over 5,000 teachers are studying around digital and collaborative learning with us. So at the heart of it, we are educators, but actually we're really focused on the technology that's really shaping our time and digitisation.
It's really cool that you're doing work with teachers, because we know that this is a space that our rangatahi, our young people, need to get into, because this really is our future. So it's really awesome that our teachers are upskilling and learning so that our children can learn from them. So, you know, what sorts of things should we be looking at, you know, business or not in business really, around the future of technology?
Yeah, so we actually think about the same skills for our teachers. And these are people, a typical teacher in New Zealand is 55 and female. And what we love is that over half our teachers outside of Auckland, and also that we have a very strong number of percentage of Māori and Pacific teachers, for example. We're really thinking about youth and how they engage and get them excited about learning. But those same skills are equally applicable to our business clients. And so the students that we have who are not teachers are typically business owners or people who work for businesses. And then the average age is 47. So we're talking about people who have grown up in an analog world and suddenly are facing this new world where everything's digitized and it's in the cloud, and they're trying to understand how do they make their business operate as they transition from analog, sort of face-to-face customers into this world that's so much more virtual. And so what we think about with businesses is, how do you reach your customers? So first of all, it's the channels to reach them, and then there's the channels to engage them and actually the experience that they have. And that's most likely to be through a web interface on a mobile phone over all other mechanisms. And then once you've got them looking at your website, for example, on their mobile phone, what can they find out about you without having to ask a single question through a phone call or an email? They need to be able to have all those answers that they're looking for. And once they have those answers, at that point, they'll think about engagement. So probably 80% of that sales process to get new customers happens before you have a single interaction with them. Once you do interact, then actually their expectation is pretty much aligned to a Netflix expectation. It's like, I want it now, I want it personalized, I want it to make sure that it suits me, I don't want to have to give my information many times, I want to make sure that the information that I'm being shared or given is relevant and important to me. And so everything has changed from this idea that a customer walks through the front door and says, hey, I've heard about you on, I saw you in the Yellow Pages, or I'm walking past and I'd like to look at what you do. that world has completely gone. So we have to think about that.
How does a business manage a customer's expectation in this changing world? Because you're right, people want it now. You can get the information straight away from the internet, and so they expect that you can do a piece of work straight away or give answers straight away. For a small business that doesn't have much resource, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, I think we have to think about what we put our resources into. It's not about tangible things like having a shop in today's world. Most retailers are thinking about how they reduce their physical footprint. Actually, if you're thinking about e-commerce is now the most likely way people are going to be buying something from you, or it's certainly that initial experience. So the investment you're going to make is almost exclusively going to be in the digital world, which means a great website, and actually building into the website as many things that you can automate as possible, so that you don't have to follow up with emails, and that you don't, at the end of a busy day, still have to go back and see who's reached out. So that's things like autoresponders. So that is when somebody asks a question or they maybe buy something from your website, they immediately receive an email back saying, hey, we've got your order, or we got your inquiry and we'll be back in touch, and this is the time frame, so that the customer feels informed. It also means things like chatbots, where someone can say, there's an automated little bot that can ask simple questions. What are your opening hours? What's your delivery policy? Things that they may want to know. Do you have a refund policy? Who owns the business? That information should be very easily accessible through some simple function like a chatbot, or a real person where they can just ask questions. And it's totally fine to say, hey, we're not here right now. And be able to, people can enter their questions and you'll get back to them in the morning if you don't have that function. E-commerce is certainly absolutely important. Whether you're selling a business service or a product or many products, equally you should be thinking about how much of that can come straight from your website in that first interaction. And so you're only really nurturing the customers who are high value and not spending time and energy on a small transaction or a small interaction. It's actually trying to get people who, by the time they reach out to you in a physical sense, picking up the phone, sending you an email, they're actually looking at a bigger deal than just, I'm looking for a simple solution for this, or I need one gizmo or one gadget, which you should be able to automate as much of that as possible. But that does take investment, and it does take an understanding of this whole digital world, which, to be honest, none of us have that unless we learn it. It's not something that we're born with. So if you're older, if you're someone like me who's had to constantly reinvent myself, relearn and actually understand technology, and it's not about sort of understanding technology like my kids learn, because they're consumers of technology, is understanding it through a business lens. And that does take a little bit more commitment, or commitment of your staff, perhaps, if you're lucky enough to have some staff who can support you.
So I know when I started out, when we started we invested in our website. It cost us about $7,000 or $8,000, or actually probably more than that, which at the time was ridiculous because we were a startup. And I decided I wasn't paying that anymore, and I learned it. And it's not the easiest thing to learn. I guess if you've got the time, then that's fine. And I am going to ask you a question, which is very much how long is a piece of string. But if you don't have the time, or say the staff that know and understand how to set up e-commerce and websites and all that sort of stuff, what can a small business sort of look like, what sort of a roundabout figure for like a basic setup of an e-commerce site and some of this automation compared to what I'm sure is going to be quite a large investment for something that's very technical and can probably do a lot of those, the automation and the chatbots and that sort of stuff. So roughly, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, and it is a hard question to answer. And the good thing is it's become a lot less expensive over time, because now there are plug and play. So a developer will, if they're doing e-commerce, will probably get a Shopify plugin. They'll have a New Zealand GST plugin. They'll have a plugin for an autoresponder. They'll have a plugin. And so when they're building it, there are templates now. So there are companies who are really good at putting together templated sites, and they'll be on a WordPress or a Wix type solution. So you can, if you are technically interested and enabled and also have the time, to build your own and use the same types of plugins. But to your point, it does take time, and if you're not naturally interested in that space, it's probably not a good use of your time. So if I was to put a price on it, you're not going to get really much change somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to make something that is also secure. Now, that's really important, that as soon as you move into e-commerce, that you are now responsible for a whole lot of data legally. That means you're taking credit card information, you're taking personal information, you're taking physical address deliveries. So you've got data that you're now responsible for that you perhaps wouldn't have in the physical world. And so sometimes cheap will cost you a lot of money. So don't be fooled by someone who says, I can build you a website for $200, because actually what they're doing is bypassing a whole lot of protocols that you need to have. So if you're thinking $5,000 to $10,000, and actually from there, if you were a larger retailer and you had multiple SKUs or products, and so say you had 400 different SKUs, I mean, immediately you're going to be increasing. Suddenly it could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 quite quickly. You should be thinking about that in terms of that investment being able to replace a lot of the costs you might have in the physical world. And if you think about through COVID and lockdown, how many businesses who were fully virtual just carried on business as usual. And in fact, in many cases, they doing better business than ever because people were looking for local suppliers. And so they weren't necessarily looking for international suppliers who they knew wouldn't get the products into the country anytime soon. And so they have really thrived in the COVID world. Unfortunately, those who required people to physically pick up the phone, to call them or to walk through the door have really struggled. And I know some of you will be in that category because the website you have, if you have one, will often be what we call a brochure site, which is, this is who I am and this is what we do, but you can't actually interact with the site in any way. So it's basically a brochure. If you're like that, you're also, chances are you're not indexed by Google, which means you're not coming up in search engine optimization or search terms. So if somebody is looking, for example, for a small business who does lighting, and you are just have it one of these very simple brochure sites, you won't find your website, or we pages and pages for it's discoverable. And so it is important that whoever builds your site also uses search engine optimization and Google AdWords and Google the terminology so that they can find your site. And so the way that works is Google kind of constantly goes through the internet and covers off and looks and indexes new sites and rechecks them every time it goes through. And the more you have external links to reputable sites, the more that you have activity on your site, the higher indexed it becomes. And so it does take work. So this is, but the rewards are really beneficial. Like, we're talking about a significant increase in revenue when you're able to make these investments. The return is almost immediate. I haven't yet to come across a business who's put, say, $10,000 into creating a website and indexing it and getting it search engine optimized with some Google AdWords who hasn't turned around and said, wow, like, this is really how business is. This is amazing. So it does change things, but you do need to treat it in the same way as you would if somebody walks through the door. It needs love and attention. And it's ongoing. It is relentless, and it's something you need to have the patience and commitment to over a long time. You can't build a site and walk away. Someone said it's not like a diet where you do it once and hope it's going to work for long lasting. It's not. It's a marathon. You just keep going.
And I'll totally attest to that, because we spend a lot of money on our website to start with, and then I learned about SEO myself, and I'm constantly on our website just updating stuff, making sure it's got tags. All of these videos get put into it, so there's always new content. And I mean, at the moment we're getting at least 4 sold clients a week, and that's not even the leads. So if you do actually put the time and effort into your website and you get it seen by Google, then yeah, it's how people look. If you're going to buy something, you're going to look on Google for something. That's just how we roll. So why would you not put your business there too?
Yeah, and I think some people have held on to such strong legacy views about how people find your business, how they're discovered. And what amazes me is that people still spend money, for example, on white pages and yellow pages, particularly yellow pages, thinking that people are looking at them for finding a business. We've completely moved on from that world. Everything, if it's not on, if you can't find it in a Google search, it doesn't exist. And so it is so important that everybody understands the value that investment will make. It literally takes you and separates you from that old school analog world that you may have had great success in, and really projects you into this new world, which is going to be here forevermore. Which actually goes to who your customers are. There is still some pretty misinformation around who customers are in New Zealand. So if you are a New Zealand business serving New Zealand clients, first of all, people in business who are employed at the moment, the largest percentage are millennials. So a lot of people think about millennials, these pesky people who came along and would sort of wanted these radical ideas and had big sort of kind of expectations. Actually, they are now increasingly the bosses of in businesses. They are the business owners. They are the directors of marketing or sales or finance people. They are typically the leaders. So a lot less of this older generation and more of this generation who are up to about the age getting close to 40, sort of certainly late 30s. And then we have this group behind them, the Generation Z. Some people kind of call them Zoomers and to make fun of boomers, but Zoomers are sort of up to the age of 23, 24. And in some categories, like if you were selling streetwear or shoes for a youth market, that's entirely the audience you're trying to chase. And if you're trying to get a 23-year-old to buy your product, if you are not providing like an absolutely streamlined, bang on, absolutely active website experience, you are never going to be successful in that space, because that's the only place they're ever going to find you. There is no alternative. So it does depend a little bit who you're trying to talk to. But if you are only talking to people, say 55 and above as your clients, that market is diminishing. One, because they spend less money as they're more settled into their lives. They make less changes. They're not likely, for example, to change banks because of different rates. They're less likely to change products because they get into a sort of habitual process of staying with the same thing. So you want to change the people who are in that millennial market, who've got money, they're in the big part of their career, but they're also not nearly as committed to a certain brand because they're fickle. They like, treat me well, I'll stick around, treat me badly, I'm gone. So there's a lot more churn in that marketplace. So think about who you are trying to sell to. It's really important.
I do quite like the millennials. I'm not sure if I'm quite a millennial anymore, or I almost sit on the cusp. But I love millennials, and a lot of people don't like to hire millennials. But if your target audience is a millennial, and for us they are, because they are business owners now, then how best to get into their minds and know what they want than to have someone who can think like them, who can bring that to your business and help you to change your technology or do those things, give them the great experience, give them what they want. Because if you don't know what they don't want, then how can you provide that to them? And like you said, they're fickle, they'll move like a drop of a hat.
And I think people think millennials are still 25. They forget that they've grown up and actually now they own houses and have children, and some have got grandchildren. I mean, it's like this is this group of people are huge in terms of their impact right now in business, particularly in small business. And they work inside corporations. But the other side of it, the next generation, the Zoomer or Generation Z, is the biggest population grouping in the history of the world. So they are coming through. So they're about 2.5 billion people, and they are 100% digital. That is all they've known. They've had the internet and smartphones from the day they can remember. And that's not just in a Western developed world. That is across the world. So they may not have a laptop, but they will definitely have a mobile phone. In fact, we have more mobile phones in the world than we have people. So, I think some people think that there's still this part of the world that's not connected. The mobile phone now has become the tool of all business. And that is something that we really have to appreciate fully to understand how we can grow in our businesses. The other thing I think is really important is if you, for example, put an ad in the paper, the local paper or whatever it might be, you pay for that, which probably is still reasonably expensive, and you're paying for the eyeballs that actually stop and see that ad. And that could be on a local paper, as few as 30 or 40 people who actually take note of your ad. And so your $1,000 or your $500 you've paid for the ad is a really fairly high cost. Once you get to a website, if you spend, say, $5,000 or $10,000 creating that website, it is infinitely scalable. It doesn't cost you more if 5,000 people come to it or 5 people. And so, or 10,000 or whatever it might be. So it's about getting people to that site. And so you're not paying more unless you're doing it through Google AdWords, which you may pay a per click rate. But if you're just getting people to your site, then actually the most important thing to understand is every person you get to your site is a new customer at no extra cost to you. So it's worth the investment.
I absolutely agree. And then even if, because we talk about referrals I get business from referrals, and that's great because, we should. If you do a good job, people are going to refer, but the person who's being referred is still going to look at your website because they're still going to want to know about you.
Yeah, and look, referrals are great, but they're limited because actually, even though, it's the old saying that, if you do a great service, if you'll tell one person, if you do a terrible service, I'll tell 10. So, if you're trying to scale your business on recommendations of one by referrals, it would be really hard to do that. And so you do want your sort of your shop front, so to speak, to be accessible to as many people as possible. Yeah.
Cool. Now, let's talk about you as a businesswoman now, because we've talked a lot about how the digital technology can help businesses. But why did you get into business yourself in the first place? What was it that spurred you to become your own boss?
So I think I realized at a pretty young age that I was unemployable. I think it's probably the reality. So I grew up in a small town of Hawera in Taranaki, and then moved to Auckland, and then basically very shortly after that, at 17, I went to London. Just decided on a one-way ticket that I wanted to go, which is really weird thinking back because, one, I'm an introvert. Secondly, while I'm adventurous, I'm not that adventurous. So I was like, why did I decide to go on this big journey, this epic journey at 17? And I think it was this natural curiosity that I wanted to find out what the world was like beyond these shores. And I hadn't really traveled at all, so it was kind of like this big experience. And when I started working for people, my first jobs, they were very traditional employers. They were very hierarchical, quite often quite sexist, ageist. I was young, so I remember having to think about telling people I was older than I was because to be taken seriously. And I think I just got disenfranchised by this idea that I was going to have to go work things through a very long way to get to where I wanted to be, which was to be able to make decisions. And I like making decisions. I like the idea that you can make decisions quite quickly, mostly if you've got enough information, you've done your research, and a little bit of intuition. And so I was like, I sort of trust my gut to a certain extent. And so by the time I came back to New Zealand, I'd really realized that I did want to work for myself. So I started, this is actually my 5th business, and each one has got bigger over time, probably because I get more confident in what I can do and how I can work. But it fundamentally was, I want to solve a problem. I'm purpose-led. I want to do something that has impact. I decided education and development of people was going to be my thing, and actually sharing knowledge. And then it was really a case of how do I do that? I started off, my first business was actually in marketing consultancy, and just having a few clients and people I knew, and this is pre-internet, well, certainly early internet. And so it was much more traditional and word of mouth type. I certainly did have ads, for example, in the Yellow Pages. And that was great, but it certainly didn't fulfill me in terms of scale. I wanted something bigger. And then over time, I did a co-founded business then. And then eventually I started really doing bigger businesses on my own. And so with the Mindlab, I kicked that off. We've just hit our 7th birthday, so 7 years, and Tech Futures Lab, which is also owned by the Mindlab, launched 4.5 years ago. So I had 2 businesses in close succession, each serving different groups. So the Mindlab is about helping people who work in the not-for-profit and for-purpose sector. So people who work in social enterprise, or they work for organisations that are not-for-profit. So education, health, social welfare, community groups, charities, etc. And Tech Futures is about people who work in professional roles, so running their own business, entrepreneurs, or work in corporates. So we separated them out, and actually the desire to still be able to make an impact and be able to make decisions on my own is still probably there. It's that ability. I have a great board. I have a really amazing team of people and staff, but I do like this idea that I'm not accountable to someone else. My business is only as good as what I put into it. And so I am the 100% owner of both organizations, but that is really not because I want the glory of being a CEO and a founder, but more about this idea that, I like to hustle. I like to make progress. I like to make an impact, and I love to work with other people. So it's really about what motivates you. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're waiting for other people to make decisions, or you've had a partnership or a boss that's holding you back, or you're really constrained by someone who's highly conservative or really risk adverse because they have to have all the right things in line before they even make a decision. You'll know that frustration if you are a natural business owner or an entrepreneur, that you really want to move to that space where you have more freedom to do your own thing and to make decisions. And also sometimes fall on your sword when you make a bad call, which is, actually something I also strangely enjoy, which is sometimes you get it wrong, but you learn really fast when it's your own livelihood and what it means on you for yourself and your family.
It's funny because if you don't learn fast, then you just make the same mistake and you'll keep making it until you learn.
Yeah, you get better at that. I think age, strangely enough, helps you to learn from your mistakes faster, and also to accept critical feedback. And this idea that just because you think sometimes it's a good idea and others may not, and sometimes you learn it the hard way. So listening to other people is really seriously important to understand that a good idea is only as good as people who want what you're offering. And there is something about having your livelihood at risk, or your house at risk, or your assets that make you think with clarity, that there is you can't waste, because if you do, then it's not just your livelihood, it's your staff and their families. You're actually accountable now for however many people you employ. And I think that in itself gives you a sense of responsibility that drives, you should do things better and be more relentless about making a change and doing things well and taking every bit of advice that you possibly can, rather than sort of just going ahead all the time with just a relentless, I'll just keep going and keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. You can't do that when you've got your own business.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. So we've talked about falling on your own sword. So what are some of the challenges and the obstacles that you've faced in business, and what have you learned from them?
Yeah, there's been a lot of adversity that I've had to navigate, which some will be familiar to everyone. The constant trying to find the right money for investment and growth, that you know what you need to do, but you don't know where to find the money to do that, and should you risk it? So there is that aspect we all have as business owners of, what if I do it too soon, or I take risk and then the reward's not there? So I think for me, it's thinking about, what if you don't do it? It's probably the little mini me that sits on my shoulder. It's, if you don't do this, what will happen, or what won't happen? And of course, the what won't happen is nothing moves on if you don't put the time and money into it. And so actually that is something that comes from adversity, because if you're at the stage where you're thinking, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay people next week, if you do nothing, you know the outcome. You're not going to be able to pay people next week. So you're put at the top of a cliff saying you need to do something really different. So the adversity that comes, which has sometimes been a market deteriorates, or suddenly a product just becomes less popular, or maybe a competitor comes into the market, is actually the biggest learning curve for you to kind of disrupt yourself, like actually saying, what does my business need to do differently? And the other thing I've learned along the way is stick to your knitting, which probably a very sort of old school term, but this idea where don't try to just keep doing new things, like you let things sit and embed in. I think in my earlier career, I would try something, give it a few weeks and expect results, and then go, oh, it hasn't worked, I'm going to do something else, and then pivot and do another thing, and then and never sort of sit long enough and invest enough time in it. So you have to invest enough time and energy into something to let it understand, does it find its market that you think is there, that it actually gives you the returns and the indicators that it's going to be successful, and then you can back it more heavily. So it's that little iterative, step in a bit further, step in, and if it's not quite right, step back a bit and move with time. But I've also had times when I've had to borrow expensive money to get me out of a pickle, where the actual cost of access to that funding it's ridiculous. And in hindsight, I think, oh my goodness, there's some really expensive money out there if you're in a real tough corner. And they are big mistakes to make. You need to respond much faster when you know that if cash flow is running low, you actually have to start doing something about it quickly. And that investment is actually putting money into the right place. And then your partners, if you do ever get a partner, and I've had some doozies. So actually there's times when I felt that having a business partner would be great, and actually have found out that if you don't have the same moral and ethical compass, and you're not really your vision and purpose is quite misaligned, and if one partner, for example, is very much focused on money and returns and financial dividends, then you're going to be in trouble. That's not my priority. It's not my driving force. It is an outcome from working hard and doing great things, but it's not what I get out of bed for in the morning. And so I think sometimes you learn that the hard way, and it's really hard to do due diligence on a partner if you're suddenly in a situation where you think, hey, this person is offering an investment into my business, and so they're going to come in as 50% shareholder, and you think they're getting you out of a problem. They could actually be putting you into a problem. So sometimes bank money might be a better option, for example, particularly right now when there's such low interest rates, that it's worth putting the investment in rather than trying to get, so to speak, into bed with someone else that you really don't know how they operate until you're deeply immersed in the business, and they can take you off course really quickly. Thankfully, I haven't had this for a number of years, but I can certainly tell you that I've had my fair share of making some decisions trying to either accelerate things or to decelerate risk by making the wrong decision about who I'm working with. So make some really good calls on that.
Yeah, totally. Right money and right partner. 100%.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Yeah.
That's amazing, the number of people that I've spoken to that have made wrong choices along the way in regards to those, but you learn fast.
Yeah, and sometimes, I had a situation, I'm a bit careful how I say this, but I actually had a government partner. And so you think, oh, it's the government, this is going to be awesome. It's you can't get better than this. And as a 50% shareholder, and it didn't work out because they got into financial trouble. Wow. Which was like the most unexpected overnight kind of headline news, suddenly realizing that so even when you think that you've got a certain a partner where you think it's so secure, and in my particular case, it was the least secure, because actually it was such a big entity. I didn't have no understanding of how much trouble they were in. And so I ended up bailing out a government partner, which just sounds crazy right now, but it's what happened.
Jeepers. So before we wrap up today, Frances, is there anything else, like looking back on your journey, that you'd like to share? Any words of wisdom for the listeners this evening?
Yeah, I think my big advice would be, if you are an owner operator and you literally are running a business on your own, or perhaps having support of family or friends just when you need them, if you can afford to hire someone, do it. And if that person you pay them more than you can ever take out of the business yourself, but they bring the ability for you to get perspective in your business and an extra pair of hands when you're exhausted, do it. Because you cannot grow a business from one person. It's just impossible. You cannot be jack of all trades and expect to be working all the hours of the day and getting up the next day feeling excited about what you do. You become jaded very quickly. So what I would say to most small businesses, you're not really a business until you can afford someone. And when you afford them, don't find the cheapest person in the market. Don't find someone who's willing to take the job at minimum wage. If the person says to you, look, if they're valuable, they bring expertise, and they're earning more than you are or ever hope to earn, they will still enable you to get the clarity about what you need to do for your business, and they will set the tone of what your business will become. Because once you get a person like that, the chances are the third person you get will also be a highly skilled person. And suddenly you go from small business to medium business quite quickly, because you've actually put the systems and processes in place. Somebody who has actually come from a world where they're familiar with systems and processes and marketing channels and sales channels and partnerships with logistics and manufacturers or whatever it might be. If you get someone who's inexperienced, they are become quite difficult in terms of your scale. Great to hire those people when you're big enough to hire them, when you've got systems and processes and everything in place, and then you can hire as many of those unskilled or low-cost people as you possibly can. But your business needs the best minds at the table as early as possible, and then you actually the ability to scale quickly and grow a business can happen really fast, and that's something I've certainly learned in more recent times. I've learned how to grow a business quickly with the right people, and And actually sometimes it hurts because the biggest cost in the business is going to be the person you pay to come in to help you out.
Yep, and sometimes it is, like you said, more than what you're paying yourself, but it's for the future.
I've never had a business I started where I paid myself $1 on the first year. Like it's never happened. I don't think it ever will. It sort of feels like because you're using every bit of capital, every time I get a growth in a business, I've sold a house, my house I live in with my family. I've had to sell it to be able to help bankroll what I want to do, because every business gets bigger, it sort of becomes more of a cost to do it. But I still never take a salary because it just feels like counterintuitive that you've just, you've now, because you want to get back to the place where you can have an asset again. And if I always think I'm lucky enough to get a house again, fantastic. But you go in making sacrifices, but it's part of the joy, it's part of the challenge, and it's part of that excitement of running a business. I mean, I wouldn't give it up for anything. Like I would never see myself at any point in my life working for someone else. I just, I absolutely love this idea. You get to do what you want to do, even though sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, it's so true. I think you and I so alike, Frances. I'm totally not employable. Ask any of my previous bosses before I went into business.
I think it's good to know that when you know that there's something entrepreneurial about yourself. Like you just know that actually, and I meet young people. I regularly mentor young people who are like, I just don't want to work for someone. I'm like, then don't work for someone. Start small, find your niche, ideally find a service and not a product to sell, because you haven't got to put the capital outlay. See what you're good at and find people who want what you can do. And it's amazing, and you watch them sometimes so quickly realize that that's a real thing. And in fact, tomorrow I'm talking about this exact journey of entrepreneurship to 85 year 13 girls from a whole range of schools across Auckland. And I'm really looking forward to it because they'll be hearing all day from people about what university they should do and what programs they should be doing and what qualifications. And I'll be the one standing going, no, just hustle, start a business, be your own boss. And so I think it's an option that too many people exclude because they think they're too young, or it's too early, or it needs too much money to get going. All of those are false. There is no right time. And actually, I think particularly young people, I think if you can do this before you have families, I think that's, and I did. I was an entrepreneur before I had family, because then you haven't got that guilt of, one, time you spend in your business and not with your family, but secondly, the financial risk is nowhere near as if you've got no real assets, there's no better time to start a business. You've got nothing to lose, so just do it.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I'd love to hear later on how you get on tomorrow with all of these girls. Hopefully we have some little young, well, not little young, but some young entrepreneurs coming through, which would be awesome.
They're coming from all over Auckland, and I'm really, and again, we've got a really large number of Māori-Pacific girls coming in, and I know there's going to be pressure from some of their families to do those, particularly our Pacific girls who love, their parents do those traditional doctor, lawyer, accountant type things. It's like, actually, what if you want to be the owner of those organizations? It's like, how do you? So I'm always hopeful we can get some of that just little seed in their minds of like, wow, that's a real option.
Yeah, I think it is. That's one of the things that I say to my son. I'm like, what do you want to be? What are you going to do? I've now learned I should be asking what problem do you want to solve, but we're like, okay, you want to be the boss of Countdown, son. You don't want to work at Countdown. You want to be the boss. It's like, I want to fly an airplane. Cool. So you want to own an airline, or like you want to be a billionaire so you can buy yourself a plane.
Design it, or be the designer of the airline, or be the new one that does the new electric planes, be the kind of innovator. Yeah. So it's all of that stuff. Those are good conversations to have with your kids about the ambition. But also, start, where do you start so that you don't just get caught out with getting on that conveyor belt of everybody else doing the same stuff.
So true. Anyway, Frances, that's been a riveting conversation today, and so much people are going to take out of that with so many things, but especially around the digitization and the things that we can be doing in our website and automating them, which is going to be so much cheaper than hiring someone to do if you can get it done right. And it's going to pay dividends in the future too. This investment now can bring you customers tomorrow, next year, years after, if you just take good care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nurture it like a garden. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's been so lovely to talk to you. I could talk all day. So
me too. That's why I love doing this. I get to do that all day. Just talk to
people about
business.
It's so good. Yeah.
All right, everybody. So I'll see you tomorrow night, 8 p.m. for our next cup of tea. And Frances, thank you once again for joining us this evening.
Kia ora.
Mā te wā whānau.